Since you're watching this video, you are very likely already aware that this guy, Giangio, has another identity. He also goes by the name Philippus Paracelsus, which is revealed to us via the after credits scene. This naturally opens the door to the question, if he has one alternate identity, does he have others? And with the other arguably much bigger reveal in the same scene, this has led many, me included, to theorize about what other storybook characters might be included in those identities. So I'd like to go over some of the potentially many faces of Paracelsus, starting with the two confirmed, and moving on to some of the more speculative ones. When we first meet Paracelsus, he introduces himself as Giangio.
My name is Giangio. I'm an pharmacist. Yes, pharmacist. I'm looking for the legendary gold coin fruit.
With Liza P being inspired by Pinocchio, this is interesting because Giangio, also called Farmer John, is a character from that story as well. Giangio in The Adventures of Pinocchio was the farmer who bought Romeo, aka Lampwick, after he was turned into a donkey and worked him to death. Pinocchio, as a puppet, takes over working for him to earn daily glasses of milk for a sick Geppetto. The Liza P. Giangio claims to be a pharmacist after fully letting alchemists slip, but also a former farmer, which is a nod to the character from Pinocchio.
I might look urbane now, but I used to be a farmer. I'm also interested in growing trees.
He pretends to be an unconfident coward, faking a stammer and often cowering in fear. Much of what he says appears to be lies, or at least half-truths. He claims to be looking for evidence of the gold coin fruit tree when it's clear he's had at least some access to the fruit in the past. In the same vein, he asks us for help finding the gold coin fruit tree, but almost impossibly beats us to it with no help.
Fortunately, I found the gold coin tree that can be used to make a cure. It's right beyond this door.
He also says he's trying to find a cure for petrification disease, but seems surprised, almost like he forgot about it, when Geppetto's puppet brings it up for Antonia.
How's the cure for the petrification disease coming along?
Nevertheless, he's able to quickly whip one up.
The cure isn't exactly stable. Give it to the patient as soon as possible.
Since it's unlikely he's actually looking for the tree there, a fair question to ask is, what is he doing at the cathedral then? Although never explicitly explained, I would say he's more likely there on the trail of the Arm of God. The arm seems to have gone from Monad Charity House to the cathedral via Cecile, which drew the ire of the alchemist upon the sanctuary, but they seem to have lost track of it momentarily from there when Geppetto took possession and hid it in his train workshop. And if not actively looking for it, he may have been observing the effects it had on Andreas. Paracelsus was in the middle of an experiment, after all.
That book reminds me. Have you ever heard the fairy tale about a mischievous wooden puppet?
It's interesting that the story of Pinocchio does seem to exist in universe in some form as the story of the mischievous wooden puppet, and Paracelsus decided to insert himself into the events of Liza P under the moniker of a character from the story. Combined with Paracelsus having a copy of The Wizard of Oz while hunting for its main character Dorothy, it seems there is something special going on with children's tales in the Liza P universe that Paracelsus is privy to. The name Paracelsus is a reference to the real-life 16th century alchemist Paracelsus, often referred to as the father of toxicology. He is one of the most famous alchemists of all time, notably being deeply tied to many alchemical staples such as the homunculus, and had philosophies and beliefs steeped in esotericism, and more specifically, Hermeticism. It's not unlikely that his character is meant to be a fictionalized version of him, as he is implied to be quite a bit older than he looks, and given that the Liza P version does paraphrase one of his most famous quotes, "All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so a thing is not poison."
Many substances can be poisonous. The precise dose is what separates medicine from poison.
With seemingly having achieved eternal life himself, his actual goals now seem to revolve around finding and/or creating other eternal beings. The letter he leaves for us at the end of the game, the Letter of the Eternal, has custom and unique stationery, much like that of letters from many of the other main characters. His is a flower sealed to it in golden wax that has been stamped with the Old English letter G, despite being signed with the initials PP, likely for Philippus Paracelsus. We'll come back to what the G might stand for in a bit, but for now, the interesting thing is we see this exact stationery for two other letters from Overture: Great Master's Letter of Excommunication and Letter Delivered to the Garden. Of course, the insinuation here being Paracelsus very likely wrote both of these letters as well. And under this assumption, we learn quite a bit more about him. The Great Master's Letter of Excommunication is a letter written to Valentina's monad, the previous leader of the Alchemists of the Isle, before Simon snatched control of the group. He addresses him as his young apprentice, which of course tells us he served as a mentor to Valentinus. Seeing as at the time Valentinus would have received this letter, we know he would have been an older man, certainly much older than Paracelsus looks. This further drives home the idea that Paracelsus has been around for quite a while. Reading on, we can see he seems to hold quite a cold view towards human attachments, and seems to consider Valentinus responsible for Cecile taking the arm of God. So much so that, as the letter's title suggests, he excommunicated his former apprentice and provided him with an excommunicant's cure, which is almost certainly a cure in a similar vein of what Simon's crew has been giving to the people of Krat. The alchemists don't strike me as the type of organization that you just get to walk away from, especially if you're ahead of one of their sects. Too many secrets to let you live. It would seem that Paracelsus and the rest of the council aligned with Simon's twisted idea of evolution, and appeared to fundamentally agree with Simon on how they should proceed down the path of truth. Infect the people of Krat with petrification disease, and cure them with the carcass elixir. This was very likely a core part of the Krat experiment Paracelsus is reporting on in the end credit scene. After all, correspondence from beyond the sea shows the alchemist's willingness and ability to treat petrification disease with the actual gold coin fruit cure in places outside of Krat as far back as at least the events of Overture, but showed no interest in doing so within the city. Beyond having aligned goals, in a previous video I've theorized that Paracelsus might be the father Simon claims abandoned him in Simon Manus' confession, and that Simon was part of a batch of homunculi Paracelsus cooked up in an attempt to create another immortal being. I won't dig too much into that here, but if you want more details, check out that video. The letter delivered to the garden ties him to Hotel Krat and its gold coin tree as far back as at least the previous iteration, before Lady Antonia bought it and repurposed it into a hotel. We know from the Hotel Krat landmark guide that it was used as a mental hospital before being renovated into a hotel, and that, of course, the patient's records were all mysteriously burned in a fire. I don't think it's too crazy to assume, given the apparent alchemist involvement in the location, that this mental hospital was likely a front for some nefarious experimentations, as the basement continued to be after the sale. As his letter implies, he was the owner during this iteration. It's safe to assume he would have been in charge of these experiments, and I think there's a good chance they would be focused on eternal life. He mentions in the letter that he cannot delay any further as there is someone I must find. This mirrors what he says about Dorothy during the after-credit scene, so I believe he's talking about her in both instances. This makes me believe that he's been looking for her since at least before the sale of the hotel to Antonia. Paracelsus also wants Antonia to regularly pick gold coin fruit and secure it in his carrier while he's away. He doesn't necessarily ask her to do this for nothing, as he writes, "If you ever need something, simply place a gold coin fruit into the carrier." We know that the carrier acts as a vending machine for the wish cube items, but I do wonder if this agreement is why he bothers to make a real cure for Antonia when we ask.
I will make the cure if you give me 1 gold coin fruit.
She needed something, he got his gold coin fruit. While it's tempting to think he only needs her to collect the fruit because of his absence, the wording, while I would prefer to receive the gold coin fruit myself, receive, not pick or secure, tells us that she would still be collecting it whether he was there or not. And of course, we know this is probably going to be the case firsthand as he gets Geppetto's puppet to pick them for him in the base game because...
When I tried to pick the gold coin fruit, it resisted me. I couldn't even get close. It actually burned me. It's probably because I have the petrification disease.
I believe one of those things. I believe the gold coin tree would burn him if he attempted to pick its fruit, but not because he has the petrification disease.
But the alchemists have tainted everything. The gold coin tree is a pathetic creature they created from the listeners. Like many of their creations, it's tragic, but useful. You can control ergo with gold coin fruits. The sad tears of those who became trees.
With Paracelsus being a legendary alchemist, it's unsurprising the tree wouldn't want him harvesting its fruit. I think the real question here is whether it would burn any alchemist, or does this tree have something against Paracelsus specifically? Although it's hard to pick apart just how much of what he tells us is lies, I think he may have given us enough pieces of the puzzle to suspect that he might have been responsible for the gold coin fruit tree in Hotel Krat. He's a legendary alchemist of unknown age who seems to be an expert in obscure knowledge the ancient people of Krat once held, with a background in agriculture and a self-proclaimed specialized interest in growing trees. He also seems to be an expert in using the gold coin fruit.
Interact with the Saintess statue at the Grand Exhibition. You might be able to use the other powers of the gold coin fruit.
Despite this tree having been here since the age of knights and kings, Paracelsus may be the one responsible for planting this sad tree in the first place. And if he did he even go by the name Paracelsus back then? He signs the letter delivered to the garden as G, Master of the Ancient Castle. Does it and that old English G he stamps his letter with stand for Giangio, or something else? After all, the castle built around the tree is said to have been built by a man with another G name. Guillaume the king's knight found the shining tree on the rocky mountain. The tree's fruit resembles gold coins, and this fruit is a miraculous blessing for many people who have recovered from different diseases, and who have been able to escape the plague. The elated knight built a castle and called himself the Holy Knight. But remember, sojourners, miracles always have a price, no matter how captivating they may be. This is Guillaume's ballad, and as ballad would imply, it's a rather folksy telling of how the castle that would become Hotel Krat came to be. That ends with a vague allusion to an unhappy ending for the knight Guillaume, noting that miracles always have a price. This is of course assuming that Guillaume is Hotel Krat's cursed knight, and given the similarities in their stories, it's a safe bet. The cursed knight's halberd blade tells us, Hotel Krat was built from the cursed knight's castle. They say that the golden tree that once captivated the knight is still asleep somewhere in the hotel. The handle adds, the discovery of the gold coin tree made the knight of the isolated castle grow vain. The knight sought greater wealth and glory than the king, and ultimately fell to ruin from the king's jealousy. And Vanini's Landmark Guide 1 says, according to lore, Hotel Krat is an isolated castle built by an aristocrat devoted to a form of occultism after receiving a revelation from a radiant tree. Taking everything at face value, we have the following. The gold coin fruit tree was created from listeners by ancient alchemists. The tree was found by the king's knight Guillaume after it reached out to him. Guillaume at least partially realized its potential for healing and became so enamored with it, seemingly to the point of worship, that he built a castle around it and declared himself a holy knight. From here, he drew negative attention in the form of the king's jealousy, which led to his ruin, and he was henceforth known as the Cursed Knight. Before I continue, I would like to say that I am deeply curious about this unnamed king. Between this and the legendary rock titans mentioned in the origin of the Stalker masks, I hope we get some kind of content set in ancient Krat at some point. Secondly, I am mentally unable to separate Guillaume from William Marshall, the first Earl of Pembroke, the so-called greatest knight who ever lived. I'm not sure if it's a purposeful reference, but there are some notable similarities to be drawn between the two. William served 5 different English kings throughout his career, a king's knight if there ever was one. He was at one time removed from King Henry II's service, allegedly for having amassed such a fortune and prestige from tournaments that it was considered a lèse-majesté, an embarrassment to the crown caused by his perceived arrogance and greed. He also fought in the Crusades and joined the Knights Templar before his death, which would have had the crown view him as a holy knight. With things like overtly obvious Freemason iconography already showing up in Lies of P, I do wonder if we're leaning towards a Templar reference in the future. It would offer a neat explanation for the coloring of Guillaume's halberd, while the Templars offer some interesting through lines for the existing Lies of P story, particularly around the charges the group faced as it was being dismantled in the 14th century, such as that they worshipped a mummified severed head. Maybe they found the head that goes with the arm of God. Getting back to the subject at hand, do I think Paracelsus is Guillaume? No. Well, at least not the original Guillaume, anyway. Keep in mind, we are deep in speculative territory here, but I think Paracelsus stole his identity and title as Master of the Castle after Guillaume fell to ruin from the king's jealousy. The tree seemed to have favored Guillaume enough to give him revelations, at least according to the stories, and seems to dislike Paracelsus enough to burn him when he tries to pick fruit. Further, the unhappy ending that Guillaume is implied to have suffered doesn't seem to apply to Paracelsus. He seems to be doing just fine. Of course, if they are the same person, this is easily explained away by some yet unknown event where Paracelsus did something bad and lost the tree's favor, and hundreds of years should be plenty of time to recover from ruin. Further, ruin and cursed are rather subjective and vague. Ruin could have just been his title was revoked, and eternal life could have been seen by many as a curse, although Paracelsus likely would not have agreed. However, my thoughts at this time, again, doused in speculation, are that ancient alchemists created the tree from a listener and either abandoned it when the sentient tree wouldn't let them harvest, or were otherwise driven away from it. Guillaume found it, built the castle, fell to ruin, and at some point between then and the sale of the castle to Antonia, Paracelsus took over as master of the castle, possibly even stealing the knight's identity. The major obstacle that gives me pause in being sure of Paracelsus being one of the alchemists who created the tree is this loading screen line. Giangio ran away from the alchemists after getting fed up by their delusions. He has chased the legend of the gold coin fruit to heal his incomplete body. It kind of implies that it existed before him, although it could have just really been a legend until he brought it into existence. He also seems pretty on board with the direction the alchemists of the Isle are moving, with Simon taking over, according to the Great Master's letter of excommunication. And we can't see most of his body, but it looks pretty complete from what we can. Maybe this loading screen is a mistake, although I'd rather not shelf it without more concrete contradictions than it not fitting into my conjecture. It also doesn't say when this happened. It could have happened well before the events of Lies of P. The alchemists of the Isle don't seem to be the only alchemists to ever exist in universe, after all. On the other hand, maybe Giangio isn't an alternate or fake identity, but instead a stolen one. Maybe there was an alchemist named Giangio who abandoned them to chase the tree, but Paracelsus killed him, took his name, and his place in the story. We'll be seeing Paracelsus again in future Lies of P games, and no doubt we'll be getting more of his backstory, which will help give us some answers on all this. He seems to be a lock to show up again in the upcoming Wizard of Oz-based sequel, and there's already a character that at least partially shares a name with one of his identities. Saladin Paracelsus de Lambertine Evan van Smith, aka Button-Bright, is a recurring character and sometimes protagonist in L. Frank Baum's Oz and Oz-adjacent book series. He is a young human boy originally from Philadelphia, but eventually emigrates to Oz in the series. He's described as thin, with a rather pale complexion, with blue eyes. He first appears in Road to Oz, the 5th book in Baum's Oz series, where he joins Dorothy's party on its way to the Emerald City, alongside the Shaggy Man, Toto, and later Polychrome. He has his head turned into a fox head, while the Shaggy Man has his turned into a donkey's. They have their heads returned to normal after bathing in the Truth Pond, which can revert transformations, but also forces those who bathe in it to forever after tell the truth. Simon would have loved that thing. Baum's non-Oz but Oz-connected book, Sky Island, sees Button-Bright take more of a starring role. In it, he finds a magic umbrella in his attic that can fly the holder anywhere quite quickly, but can only be used by someone of the Von Smith family, although he can carry passengers. Following this story, he continues to use it back in the Oz series, until he loses it in the Valley of Mo, a place where no one ever dies and people are always young and beautiful. You've likely noticed that Paracelsus carries an umbrella, and careful observers may have noticed that this is not the umbrella etiquette, nor does it seem to be a weapon at all, as it's missing the blade. It could just be an ordinary umbrella, as Krat is quite rainy throughout the events of the game, or perhaps it's the magic umbrella. It would explain how he got to the Gold Coin Tree courtyard before us, without opening the hotel's secret door or going through the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. Further, with Paracelsus seeming to be set up to take an antagonistic role towards Dorothy, the magic umbrella would prove quite the equalizer to her shoes, as it works quite the same as they do in the book. The slippers don't technically teleport Dorothy in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, but fly her where she wants to go so fast that she will reach any destination in 3 steps. It's all pretty speculative at this point, but between his real name, their physical description matching up fairly well, Button Bright's main story beats fitting in almost perfectly with themes and symbols of Liza P, and of course the umbrella, I think there's a pretty good shot Paracelsus returns as Button Bright in the sequel. Much like the Button Bright theory, the idea that Paracelsus could be revealed to also be the Mad Hatter from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland has been around since launch. Unlike the Button Bright theory, I didn't really buy into it much until Overture. But I think now I'm a lot more on board with it. If you didn't know, the Mad Hatter is a character from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland who is trapped in a perpetual tea party with the Dormouse and the March Hare. In the story, he explains that as he was performing the song Twinkle Twinkle Little Bat at a royal concert, he was accused of murdering the time, lowercase t, by the Queen of Hearts and was sentenced to lose his head. He managed to avoid this punishment as the Queen never actually executes anyone. However, time, capital T, did not let him off as easy and punished him by stopping his time from progressing past tea time. As abstract as it sounds, having someone whose personal time is frozen in place could be one way to achieve eternal life in Lies of P, and as a reach, it could be a possible explanation as to how Paracelsus achieved his. Further, the name Mad Hatter comes from the phrase mad as a hatter, which is commonly believed to have come from the high rate of hatters with mercury poisoning-induced neurological disorders in the 18th and 19th centuries, due to mercury's use in the production of felt. Again, a bit of a stretch, but this could be seen as a connection with the real-life Paracelsus, as he was known to work extensively with mercury, and held it to very high importance, believing it to be one of the 3 prime elements, alongside of salt and sulfur. While Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is mostly known as an often nonsensical children's story, it is believed that Carroll regularly alluded to real-life English people in events. One of the more well-known scenes from the book, one where Alice finds 3 cards painting white roses red in the Queen's garden, is believed to be alluding to the War of the Roses, a 15th century civil war for the English throne fought between House Lancaster, who wore a red rose emblem, and the House of York, who were represented by a white rose. The result was the Tudor family took control of the throne and created the Tudor rose, a white rose superimposed on a red rose. This became their new emblem as a symbol of union between York and Lancaster. The Tudor rose is remarkably similar to the badge we see Leia wearing in Overture, a gold M for monad with a white background superimposed over a red rose. The badge likely came about under similar circumstances as the Tudor rose, as alchemists of the Isle taking power had caused quite a bit of tension with the old families of Krat. It could just be a superficial reference, or, and this is admittedly a leap, in a world where we know storybook characters exist, it could be giving us a tangible link between Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Lies of P. Getting back to Paracelsus, as I had previously mentioned, the letter to the garden seems to tell us that he oversaw Hotel Krat during its previous iteration, and the previous iteration was a mental institution. Being the master of a madhouse seems to be quite a Mad Hatter thing to do, if you ask me. And finally, we have the Royal Flower Tea set that reads, "Every former alchemist leader was a lover of tea." with Paracelsus being Valentinus's mentor and being described as a legendary alchemist. It's quite likely that he was one of the former alchemist leaders who was a lover of tea. And I get it. Oh wow, rich folks in the 1800s who like tea. Not exactly setting them apart. I know I need to be careful not to pull a muscle doing all this reaching, but with this, we've potentially connected Paracelsus to the core pillars of the Mad Hatter as a character. Mental health, tea, and wearing a top hat. Yes, this isn't exactly concrete, but if we were to get an Alice in Wonderland game, it's at least another game and years away, with The Wizard of Oz being up next. These are the types of breadcrumbs I'd expect to see now, with it possibly ramping up in the sequel. Peter Pan is by far the most speculative identity of the bunch I've put forth, and as such, I don't have much to back it up at the moment. Philippus Paracelsus does share initials with J.M. Barrie's Boy Who Refuses to Grow Up in most translations of Lies of P, although the Italian version spells Philippus with an F, and so the letter of the Eternal is signed FP in that localization. The PP on that letter was always undoubtedly meant to stand for Philippus Paracelsus anyway. The curiosity has always sort of spawned from the choice of combining the real-life Paracelsus' pseudonym with a part of his real name. You could say it was done just to differentiate him, and yep, I buy that, but it's still a choice that gives him, in almost every localization, the same initials as one of the most famous storybook characters of all time. In a universe where storybook characters seem to exist, you can probably see where it could be perceived as a hint. Further, Peter Pan is not only forever young in the stories, effectively immortal, but a big part of his character is actively seeking the same for the children he comes across, whether they want it or not, considering it a betrayal when they don't comply. Seems like a pretty good match from what we know about Paracelsus at this point. Another part of the Peter Pan lore is that Peter collects lost children when they fall out of their pram, and he's thought to accompany dead children on their way to heaven so they won't be afraid. We can first find Paracelsus outside of the cathedral, suspiciously close to where we find the woman's prayer note, which is a woman named Louise praying for the safety of her daughter Charlotte, and failing that, allowing her to enter heaven. We don't find a child around here, alive or otherwise, so it does make one wonder if Paracelsus may have intervened, although it could just be the devs making the rather thoughtful decision not to show us a dead baby. Finally, Paracelsus seems to have an unlimited supply of star fragments in his shop. Peter Pan's home of Neverland is written to be near the stars of the Milky Way.
Second star to the right, straight on till morning.
Lies of P likely wouldn't be so whimsical, but it could be part of an explanation as to how he's come across so many of them. I would again like to reiterate how speculative some of these theoretical extra identities are for Paracelsus. We have nothing concrete now that tells us Lies of P will even cover Alice's adventures in Wonderland, or Peter Pan in the future, or that Paracelsus will even appear again beyond the next game. This whole premise is based under the assumption that Paracelsus has a collection of alternate identities based on storybook characters beyond the one we already know about. That said, this list obviously isn't meant to be exhaustive. It's a short list of ones I find the most likely right now based on the relatively small amount of information we have. If you have other theories, I would love to hear about them in the comments.